you everyone for coming out tonight. What I'd like to do is go through a little bit about how we came to be successful in producing this documentary, and also maybe tell you a little bit of the story of how we developed the actual storyline of the documentary. The first slide is our opening slide is our opening scene from the documentary. And this is our title. A quick word about our title, The Price of Silence. This came to me when I was driving down the road, and I called up my director and said, I have this title that just came to me, and I think it's thought-provoking, and I think it'll really work well. And he said, I love it. Let's use it. A quick story. The other night I watched the making of the Wizard of Oz, a documentary, The Making of the Wizard of Oz. The guy that wrote the music for Somewhere Over the Rainbow was going out for Chinese food when he thought of that music. He pulled over to the side of the road and he wrote down the notes for that song. So these things can come to you at any time, and some of the best ideas come to you when you're the least prepared. So we like The Price of Silence because it is thought-provoking, and we want our viewers to say to themselves, what was the price of silence? What is the price of silence? So I'll start with the inspiration, and the inspiration was this book by two friends of mine that I learned about on social media, two friends of mine in the town that I grew up in, which was Pennington, If These Stones Could Talk. Those of you who don't know it, it's the story of slavery in the Saraland Mountain region and their ancestral and the author's ancestral connection. When I read the book, I was stunned to learn that slavery existed in New Jersey, number one. And I also was pretty certain that if I didn't know about it, coming from a home of two educators, a father who was an English teacher for 40 years, if I didn't know about it, I thought it was a pretty safe bet that a large percentage of the rest of New Jersey's residents didn't know about it. And the more I worked on it, the more I learned that this was true. So I was inspired by this book. I decided, since I had recently been appointed to the NJTV advisory board, I went to the vice president and said, this is a great story. I think it needs to be told. I think it would make great programming. And he said, well, why don't we start by doing a news broadcast about the book? And I said, fine. That sounds like a good idea. Sounds like a good place to start. So they did that. That was back in early 2019. Well, it went off really well. They did an on-location shoot in Hopewell, and the two authors, Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck, were there in the broadcast. And I went back to the general manager afterward, and I said, that was nice 3 minutes, but I think we could do more. I think the story needs to be told not only because of the people that just do not know about this in New Jersey, but also because at the time I was very concerned about racial relations in our country, and I was also concerned that there wasn't enough discussion about this. I thought we needed to begin a discussion. The political climate was terrible at the time, and I thought we needed to begin a discussion about it. And in order to begin a discussion about this, you need to start at the very beginning, and that's slavery. So I pitched the idea to the general manager, and he said, I think we could make a documentary. I think you should make the documentary, Ridgeley. And I said, well, I've never made a film before. He said, well, I think you can do it. And I said, well, how about the funding? Can you help me with the funding? He said, well, we really don't have the funding. And besides, if we were to fund it, we would own it. And you would lose control not only of the distribution, but also of the content. So I started on this mission to create this film. I put together a production company, a 501c3, was developed in 2019. I was able to assemble 3 very, very supportive trustees. I don't know how many of you know Jay Watson, but Jay is a professional in the environmental industry. And Karen Clark is the former president of Horizon Blue Cross New Jersey. And our 3rd trustee, Rick Gefkin, is a historian and an author of a recently published book about slavery in New Jersey. So they've been, I can't thank them enough. I couldn't have done this without them. They've been very supportive. And I could, like I said, I really appreciate their support. Next, I needed a director. Our general manager of PBS, again, recommended a friend of his who was not currently employed with PBS, but had worked for them before. When I called Andrew Schmertz, he was very interested in the project. He supported it from the beginning. He not only was supportive of it, but he was willing to go forward knowing that I had absolutely no money. And that says a lot about Andrew. I spoke to other directors. Those guys wouldn't even call me back when they found out that I didn't have funding. Andrew supported it from the beginning, and he's been with me throughout as not only as a director, but also as a consultant. And then COVID hit. And it was probably the most inopportune time to start a fundraising start to do fundraising for a 501c3 because of all the things that you need to do during fundraising that COVID prohibited. You need to get out, you need to meet people, you need to do things that garner support for your project, and you need to do them in person. So I was almost, my hopes were almost dashed by COVID. Not to mention the fact that you could not, all the libraries were closed, so research was very difficult. The libraries, the museums were closed, the libraries were closed, the archives are not completely closed, but the access was very limited. But, and I'll talk later on about how COVID affected our budget later on when we were in production. So it's been a major factor, but we forged ahead. We started our grassroots fundraising on social media, and we were very fortunate that we got the support that we did on our GoFundMe site, and through GoFundMe and through private donors from friends and relatives and anybody that I could garner support from, we were able to raise about $15,000. And then we also got an incubation grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities for $20,000. And these two items, areas of funding enabled us to hire a cameraman who is a very professional, and I'll talk more about Ed in a second. But what the funding really did was that it enabled us to produce a promotional film. The promotional film was done so professionally and looked so good that it really propped up our fundraising process. And without that promotional film, I don't think we would be where we are today, because people just loved it, and it was done so well. Ed is such a meticulous and professional cameraman and editor that when he finished putting that together, everybody that looked at it immediately thought that the project had credibility. It really gave us credibility, because when they looked at it, it seemed to look so professional, and they were taken aback. They didn't expect it to look that good. So because of the promotional film, we were able to continue fundraising, and anyone can access that at any time on our website, which is, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, productions.org. So then we had to come up with a storyline. The storyline development is a process that is not only necessary in order to continue your fundraising, because let's face it, people need to know what your story is going to be about. You can't just say, I'm going to make a story about slavery in New Jersey. They needed an outline that was more concise and detailed. The truth of it is that no matter how many times I put the storyline together, it's a constant evolution. And I'd be willing to say that it continued to evolve right up until today, when we did our last shoot in Hopewell for episode 2. It's just something in a documentary process like this. You don't really know what you've got until you've got it, and then you adjust your storyline because you come up with ideas as you're going along, and it's really an artistic process that continues to get better and better the more you work on it. So we did have a storyline from the beginning, though. We did have something that people could sort of latch on to, an idea. Although the book was a fantastic story in its beginning, we couldn't make the documentary entirely about the book, because we also wanted to grab the interest of the entire state of New Jersey, and we wanted to tell the story in a broader sense of slavery in New Jersey, and we felt that we really would be able to do that better if we could pick out 3 foundational stories and then branch off from those stories to more detail about the specifics of what went on during the enslaved people's lives. So our first and really our anchor story was the story of Friday Truehart. When I read this part of Bevan Elaine's book, I knew right away that this would be the type of story that it would evoke the emotion of the viewers, because it was the story of a child that was taken from his mother's arms at the age of 13 down in South Carolina by a Baptist minister and brought to Hopewell, New Jersey, and enslaved there until he was 34 years old. And it's a terrible story, but it's also a fascinatingly terrible story. And we thought that this would be a great way to start, not only because of the emotional aspect, but also because of the locations that we could use were still intact. When you're trying to tell a story about the 18th century, it's great to be able to tell that story in a location where it took place. And we had that location right on Broad Street in Hopewell, because that minister that left South Carolina with this enslaved boy became the minister of this church in Hopewell and stayed there until I think until his death. He was the minister there for his entire life. So we had this great location. We had this great story. We also had the church where he left in South Carolina, where he was a supporter of the revolution. So the story gets more interesting because he supported the revolution, and he had to leave South Carolina in a hurry because there were mostly loyalists there, and he knew that the British were after him. So that's why he left. That's why he left South Carolina to come to Hopewell to start that church. But we were very fortunate in that Bev Mills knew and had already made contact with the current pastor of this church in South Carolina, which still, as you can see, is still standing. So, and the other very fortunate sort of windfall was that our cameraman, Ed Nescott, had a good friend who was a cameraman in South Carolina. And we were able to do a shoot and an interview of Reverend Marshall Blaylock, the current Baptist minister of the church where Oliver Hart, the minister that left there and went to Hopewell, was formerly the minister. So thanks to Zoom, our director was able to interview the Reverend Blaylock, and our cameraman was on site and shot the interview. And it ended up becoming a really fantastic contribution to the documentary. So during the Revolutionary War, Oliver Hart was a supporter of the revolution. Charleston, South Carolina at the time was predominantly loyalists, and the British Army was marching into Charleston, and they knew that Oliver Hart was a revolutionary, and they were looking for him. So he had to leave in a hurry. He had acquaintances in Hopewell. He actually in the Philadelphia Baptist Church, and was so successful there that they had sent him from Philadelphia to South Carolina. And then when he left South Carolina, he came north again, but he originally was from the north. So the next story, and actually one that was recommended to me by one of my board members, was the fascinating story of Prime. Prime was an enslaved person in Princeton, New Jersey, enslaved by a surgeon who was a graduate of Princeton University. And this is almost or equally a fantastic, terrible story of an individual who had whose, because of his enslavement, life was continually set back and made more difficult. We have this story of an individual who had a difficult time because of his enslavement that reoccurred even after he was freed. And we chose it because it's, again, a terribly wonderful story of difficulties and trials, tribulations, and successes. Prime was enslaved by Absalom Bainbridge. He was a surgeon, graduate of Princeton University, and this individual was a loyalist. So he was loyal to the crown. And when the revolution was heading into Princeton, he knew that he had to get out of town. So he sent his wife and his slave up to his in-laws in Long Island. And on the way, or after they got to Long Island, Prime escaped. And after Prime escaped, he made it back to Princeton. And he was told, and a lot of enslaved people were told then, that if they fought for the revolution, that they would gain their freedom. So Prime fought for the revolution for 2 years as a teamster and was honorably discharged. And then after he was discharged, he was gainfully employed in Trenton. And because his loyalist owner had not served in the revolution, he owed a debt to the nation. And in order to get him to pay that debt, because he had left, he actually had fought for the British as a surgeon, and then he had left the country. And because he had not served and owed this debt to the nation, the state of New Jersey re-enslaved Prime, and he became the property of the state of New Jersey. So again, we have this this very interesting historical. I mean, this area is just so rich in history that we were very fortunate that we have this location. This is a very old photo of the original home, and we actually have the. I don't have it here, but it almost looks the same now. This is next to the Garden Theater on Nassau Street, Princeton. I don't know if you remember, this used to be the Historical Society of Princeton. This was Absalom Bainbridge home. So again, we were able to shoot at the location where the story took place. And this is a shot of the shoot that we did inside the home of Absalom Bainbridge with Isabella Morales, who the editor of the Princeton and Slavery Project, which is a wonderful website, a huge website about slavery in the Princeton area that Princeton University has put together. She's a graduate of Princeton and she has her doctorate, and she was just a wonderful contributor. And we were able to shoot it in the, we were able to get permission from the university to use this, because the university owns it now. It's not the historical societies anymore, but we were able to get this location for this shoot. And just want to comment for a minute. We've tried to choose every location that would be not only complementary to our guest, but also would enhance the story because of the background and was relevant to the actual story. So again, that's why we chose the Absalom Bainbridge story, and the Absalom Bainbridge home was available to us. And from my former career, I had an acquaintance with Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter, who is the chair of New Jersey's Black Legislative Caucus. And we were able to get Shavonda to contribute to the documentary, not only on this topic, because Prime was finally freed through legislation. And he's one of only 3 individuals in the state of New Jersey that were formerly enslaved that were freed through legislation. So we were able to get Assemblywoman Sumter to comment on the difficulty, how difficult it is to get legislation passed now, and what it might have been like to pass that legislation back then. And again, you can see this is a screenshot documentary. That location is committee room number 12 in the State House. And it's the former Supreme Court chambers from 1910. It was the most beautiful room, but we were really very fortunate to be able to get this location to the shoot with Shavonda. It really enhanced her contribution. And it did wonders, I think, for the documentary. And she will also be, spoiler alert, she will also be have a prominent role in part 2. And then the third story, our third foundational story, was the story of the Van Wickle slave ring. And this is another terrible event that went on with New Jersey's enslaved people by a wicked, evil judge named Judge Van Wickle, who put together a scheme to kidnap formerly enslaved people or enslaved people, either or, and persuade people that were formerly enslaved that they were going to be able to get gainful employment if they allowed him to take them on a ship down to Louisiana, where he had a son-in-law named Charles Morgan, who had a plantation, and he resold them into slavery. So when I learned of this story, and as with the other 2, I was so taken by it that I thought this would be another great example of the terrible things that went on in New Jersey. And he was, as far as we know, there may have been more, but he was successful in spiriting away 137 individuals. I think as many as 20 of them were children, and then taking them to Louisiana and selling them into slavery, where, as you know, the conditions were much worse than they were in New Jersey, and some of the people were already freed. So this took place up in East Brunswick, and we were not able to find a location to do the shoot for the Van Wickle slave ring that was as relevant as the other 2. However, we did find a beautiful library in East Brunswick where we were able to, and there's a shot of the president of the Lost Souls. So there's a project called the Lost Souls Memorial Project whose mission is to bring this story to light to people in New Jersey, and they want to build a memorial to the 137 lost souls who were the victims of this slave ring. And so that's a picture of Tony Hendricks, who is the president of the Lost Souls Memorial Project, commenting on that story. in the East Brunswick Library. So through my research of these stories, I really felt strongly that in order to tell this story without bringing it to current events today and not mention how slavery's lasting effect is still impacting the African-American community. So our storyline evolves from these three foundational stories to the lasting effect on the African-American community that slavery is having today. And here's just one example that I took from an organization that I've been working with on the documentary, who's also been a contributor of the median net wealth of white residents compared to the median net wealth for Black individuals. And it's so shocking. And I don't see how you can look at a statistic like this and say that slavery wasn't the reason that we are living in a world where we have disparities like this. And this is just one example. There's multiple disparities that are going on today. So where the film has moved from, in part two, moves from the story of these three foundational stories of slavery to the lasting effect of slavery on the African-American community. And then, you know, I didn't want to end the project, the documentary, on a down note. I wanted to end it on an upscale story that showed how the Black community has made wonderful contributions to our arts and culture, despite these disparities and these hurdles that they've had to overcome throughout the past hundreds of years, or since the Civil Rights Act, really, that they've been able to overcome all these difficulties and make these wonderful contributions to our arts and culture. So that's the last part of the film. You know, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And our story is going to end on a high note with despite the difficulties, they've been able to make wonderful contributions. And we did not get Marvin Gaye, obviously, he's not with us any longer, but we did get someone. This is a spoiler alert. We just shot this today at the Hopewell Theater. And she is a very accomplished musician from New Jersey. And we were very fortunate to get her, and she made a wonderful contribution. I'm very excited about this. And I'm not going to leave it up too long because I don't want to ruin it for everybody.
You do have another question in the chat, along with some comments. There was a comment from Dr. Nicole Stevens, who said that the story about tricking ex-slaves was also featured in the movie 12 Years a Slave. Christine would like to know, when will part 2 be televised? And that was it.
Okay, I'm going to get to, thank you for that comment about the 12 Years a Slave. I did not know that. And I'm going to get to the part 2 answer in a few more slides, but I did want to mention that we were very fortunate to recently get awarded another $20,000 from the Council for the Humanities to create part 2. So that, combined with other funding, will be very helpful in completing the documentary. And I'll quickly go through a little bit of the funding challenges that we had. But let me begin by telling this quick story of how I attended the New Jersey's gubernatorial debate down at Rowan University back in October. And I was invited because of my position on the NJ PBS advisory board. NJ PBS had the contract to televise this. So because I was invited to this, and I went down there, and it was during COVID, and they were only filling the auditorium at like 60% capacity, but everyone was sitting down at the lower level in the front. And I thought, why would you, there's a beautiful big balcony and nobody's sitting up there. So I went up and sat in the balcony, and literally I was one of only about 3 or 4 people. And who came in and sat down 2 seats over from me? That was Joe Lee, the new vice president and general manager of NJPBS, whom I hadn't met yet. And at this time, I didn't have any funding for the film. So I took the opportunity to pitch the project to him before the debate began. And ironically, during the debate, Governor Murphy mentioned that there were disparities in New Jersey between the Black and white community, and that the African Americans were still feeling the effects of slavery, and he was booed, which really drove home the point that I was trying to make when I pitched my project to Joe Lee. Well, at the end of the debate, Joe said to me, I like the idea. I'm going to talk to the president. Would you be interested in creating a documentary for us? And if I can get you $50,000, and we would only ask that you'd make a 30-minute segment. And I was like, well, this is this is something that I can't say no to, even though our budget at the time was $300,000, and our storyline was set up for a 1-hour documentary. So it really threw a curve into the whole, but you have to be adaptable, and I couldn't say no to $50,000. So I said, okay. He called me back 2 weeks later and said, I just came out of a meeting with Neil Shapiro, and we got you $100,000. So all I needed to do was figure out a way to split my storyline of 3 stories and the lasting impact on the African American community into 2 parts. And it actually ended up being something that not such a bad idea after all, because our ultimate goal is to get this incorporated into the curriculums of New Jersey's schools, middle schools, high schools, and universities. And to have a 30-minute segment, it makes it very adaptable to the classroom. So I thought this could work. The only thing that it broke my heart to split the story in 2. And when am I gonna get to do part 2? And we said, you know what, we'll just go forward and we'll worry about that as we go. So we started production of part 1. I got a co-production agreement with NJPBS with $100,000 in funding. And I had them write into the contract that I would have distribution rights for educational purposes, and they were happy to do that. So it was really a win-win situation. I spoke to my director. He said, let's do it, the 100,000, we can make it work. And that's where we are today. I think June 22nd was the airing of part 1. So we split it at the second story. We told the story of Friday Truehart. We told the story of Prime, and then we ended it there. There's a few other little stories in there that we used for transitions and for setups. There's also a story of Sylvia Dubois that we were able to get in there. So that was part 1, and now part 2, we're going to tell the story of the Van Winkle slave ring and the lasting effect on the African American community. So we were able to split it there and divide it into 2 parts, and part 1 aired June 22nd. And as we were working, after we finished part 1, and actually as we were working on it, there was a strong interest in developing the second and creating the second part. And we just recently signed a co-production agreement and got funding for part 2. We got $64,000 for part 2 from PBS. And I just got that, I mentioned it earlier, that $20,000 grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. So one of the benefits also during part 1, we were able to do some of the shooting for part 2. So we're going to save some money during the production of part 2, because we already have the pieces that we need to put in there. and part one. And so part two is, that's part one, and this part two is the lingering effects of slavery in New Jersey. And it's due, actually I did the last shoot today. And I'm so happy that we were able to pull it off. I mean, getting locations, camera crews, guests, and making sure one person gets COVID and the whole thing's off. So, and we all have to be tested the day before single shoot. So I was very happy to learn that we were able to complete the documentary today with the final shoot. And that's due August 1st. Actually, the rough cut, they call it August 1st, the final cut, August 8th. And we anticipate that now they will be shown in consecutively, and probably mid-August, mid to late August will be the final airing of both episodes.
What time frame does part one take place from Princess Hoagland?
So time frame is the mid to late 18th century. So Civil War, Revolutionary War. What was that? I think 1765. Yeah, 1764. 1764. The Gradual Abolition Act was 1804. So that was, as we all know, or if you don't know, I'll tell you that the Gradual Abolition Act was a BS process of telling them that they were free only if they were 21 years old, if they were a man. If they were born into slavery, they still remained a slave until they were 21 years old as a man, or 21 years old as a woman, 24 years old as a man. So it went on right up through 18, right up till the Civil War, to the 1865, they were still enslaved people.
Right. And Colleen, forgive me, I know I'm going to mess up the name, but Colleen would like to know, was that Danelia Cotton in the Hopewell Theater? Daniela?
That was Danelia.
Ah, there you go.
I was
Spot on, Colleen.
trying to find an artist to make this contribution. I was looking for either artists who contributed to the art museums around New Jersey, or directors of art museums in New Jersey, to show us African American art. And but my real interest was to use a musical artist, and I was searching musical artists that were born in New Jersey, and it was starting to, it's difficult. I mean, I looked at some of the artists that were successful, and I couldn't even get in touch with them. And yet here, right in my own backyard, I had this talented, successful person that was more than happy to help the project, and it really worked out very well today. And I couldn't tell you, she exceeded our expectations.
All right, I know there's rain in the background, so if you can't hear me, let me know. But speaking of your own backyard, Sam shared that the Trent House Museum does interpret the lives of 11 enslaved people, men, women, and children who worked on William Trent's plantation in the early 1700s. Colleen let us know that Danelia Cotton is fantastic, as you said. And Laura Transu says, I work with college film and media students. Is there a way to get in touch with you, Ridgeley, or the production company, which is still you, Ridgeley, to explore ways to connect the project and or making of story with them? So here's another educational connection that can be made. Ridgeley, I believe what we're asking is if you could share your information, contact information, so we can grow our network.
We go on to an NJPBS website, we should be able to
Search the
search
price of
for
flour. The price.
That's part 1 and part 2 are on the website.
No,
just part
two,
1 so
two
far.
under today.
Oh, okay. I can do that for
So,
you.
and I have to, yeah, I have to say, when I watched it and then got to the end, and I wrote Ridgeley this, I said, it left you at a point where you were just eager to know more. So I think even though you had to split it into 2 and there was some trepidation about that, some concern, I think that the way it's laid out, not only does it fit within classroom use, but it also really, really sets up a viewer for wanting to know more, and which is a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful way to end that first part.
Oh, thank you, Sam. That was the hope, and I have to say we have gotten nothing but accolades and great responses from everybody who's seen it so far.
Well, we are so pleased and proud to have you with us tonight, Ridgeley. Beverly and Elaine are partners with the Trent House, co-founders of the Sankofa Collaborative, and they are wonderful inspirations as they were for your work. And it's so great to see their stories being taken into new media.
Yeah, and I have to say, it was very fortunate for me to have that connection with Bev and Elaine, not only throughout this whole thing, but even today when I didn't know the answer to a question.
Yes.
They backed me up. Bev backed me up. So it's great. I'm still learning every day, and certainly willing to continue that. And I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity. I love to be able to talk about it and promote it. Quite truthfully, this is the first PowerPoint presentation that I've done for the film. So please forgive
Great
it.
job.
It was great that you guys gave me the opportunity to promote it in this format. And I really appreciate that, because that's what it's all about now, is promoting it once it's done. We want to get the public educated, and we want to start that conversation.
Thank you for being part of the Trent House community, all of you. Ridgeley, keep doing what you're doing. I'm excited. I also will be watching the video later on tonight. And with that, I am done. Can't wait to see you all at the next event.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody.